Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us live today, and anyone who's viewing the recording on demand afterwards. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So this is our second of a four-part webinar series that we'll be doing quarterly on format compliance and the EARS patterns. If you didn't attend or view our first webinar, which introduced format compliance and why it is often a requirement in requirement writing, we'll be happy to share the recording with you afterwards. So we're going to quickly touch on webinar 3 at the end. So if you are interested in joining us for those upcoming webinars, we recommend that you make sure you are signed up for marketing emails from our team, follow QRA Corp on LinkedIn, and connect with Danielle, Preet, and I on LinkedIn. We will share our information with everyone when we follow up. Do apologize if there's any noise in the background. We're in Halifax, Nova Scotia right now. We've got a bit of a thunderstorm happening. So don't be concerned for us. We're safe inside, but it's pretty treacherous out there. So yeah, we will have a question period at the end, but please do feel free to add some questions throughout. If it makes sense to answer them throughout the conversation, then we'll do so. And if not, then we'll get to them at the end. So today we're going to be talking about how to put EARS into practice and the people who have. So although our first webinar in the series focused on format compliance in general, today we'll be focused on the most popular form of format compliance among safety critical complex project organizations, and notably the one that our software QVscribe has integrated features for. This, of course, is the easy approach to requirement syntax, or EARS. Today, we'll expand upon our discussion of the 5 base EARS patterns and introduce the quote-unquote complex patterns, showing you how QVscribe can empower your engineers of any experience level to rewrite requirements to comply to these complex patterns. We'll continue by talking about our firsthand experience that we have dealing with our customers before, during, and after integrating this popular system of format compliance into their development process and the benefits they realize by doing so. Our organization, QRA, also have a number of guides and resources we put together over the years around tips and techniques to improve your requirement writing, and our documents on the EARS patterns, which we will discuss a bit today, are always our most downloaded. So if you haven't had a chance to check out our definitive guide for EARS or some of our other resources, again, please reach out afterwards and we can share some info on that. So a bit more about us. We are QRA Corp. We're based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. Thundery, lightning, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, as it stands right now. We started with a formal analyzer for model-based system engineering within the aerospace and defense industry, and that was our first tool called QVtrace. We were looking for perfect storm scenarios within models. And what we realized is that a lot of the issues we were finding within the models were a result of the requirements that were guiding them. So poorly defined requirements led to poorly built models, and that led to a significant number of issues. So we looked to the market to find a complementary tool to improve the requirements, and it didn't exist. So we built it. And that became our second tool, QVscribe. Over the upcoming years, we realized what the market already knew, that most of the issues that were found at all project stages were actually originating within requirements. So we focus more and more attention on improving QVscribe, and that's where most of our attention has been over the last 6 years. So we've now expanded our customer base, and we work with industry leaders among complex safety critical engineering teams in oil and energy, defense and space, automotive, transportation, government, aerospace, consulting, and medical services. So to introduce the team that we have chatting here today, same as the first webinar, myself, Justin Tweed. I've been about almost 1.5 years with QRA. I'm an account executive working mainly on the pre-sales side of things. So my experience is with customers who are looking to make improvements to their requirement processes and overall development process. And they're typically running into project delays, verification issues, misinterpretations, and other sorts of issues as a result of poorly defined requirement that our software and format compliance techniques like EARS can help resolve. Danielle Power is our onboarding and training manager. She's been with QRA for over 4 years. She ensures all of our users can fully implement QVscribe into their requirement workflow and properly understand how to leverage it. Working on the post-sales side and following customers as they improve their processes through the use of QVscribe and EARS, Danielle has seen firsthand the huge difference that these tools can provide. Prekar is our product manager. She is responsible for product strategy and roadmap for all QVscribe product lines. She's been with QRA for over 1.5 years. And Preet leverages the information that's provided by Danielle, myself, and everyone else working frontline with our customers in regards to what issues are plaguing these customers, and finds ways to implement this into these solutions into QVscribe, including features related to the ears patterns. So this conversation can really benefit you no matter what stage of your requirement journey you are. Whether you're a process authority looking for standards to implement across your organization to ensure that everyone is on the same page, and you can be confident that processes will be predictable and repeatable. Requirement leader who is looking for ways to help their team out with the complex task of requirement creation and ensure that they can meet the strict timelines and cost expectations of projects. Or a requirement author who is looking for ways to take some of the complication and thinking out of their own role and be able to stand out from the crowd with the quality of their work. So to quickly summarize our first webinar, we first introduced format compliance and why it's important. We went on to show how to rewrite some requirements using ears, and then talked about elevating your requirements by ensuring format compliance. So format compliance is the systemizing the structure of requirements so that no matter who creates a requirement, regardless of their experience level, what past industries they've worked in, and whether they're first language or fifth language English, the requirement always reads the same. With requirement engineering comes the struggle of alignment, communication, and the dynamic nature of the development process. But systemizing the requirement process through techniques like format compliance can help avoid errors and ensure success. From there, we showed how the 5 base patterns of ears can help to alleviate some common issues within requirements engineering, and how QVscribe makes it easy to ensure your requirements are conforming to ears. Finally, we discussed the benefits of format compliance and ears offered to your development process. Beyond just simplifying the creation of requirements, it creates more efficiency in requirement review, as well as design development and other latter project stages. Today, we're going to be talking about ears in action. So we're going to talk about some common problems in requirement engineering. Danielle is going to do another demonstration rewriting requirements using ears and QVscribe. Some additional features of QVscribe are going to be shown today, as well as talking about the complex patterns of ears. And then Preet is going to talk about some ears success stories that we've seen, again, working with our customer base, and our recommendations as far as how to leverage this within your process. So what are the biggest issues that we see within requirements? And there are many issues within requirements that can lead to misunderstandings, incorrect assumptions, and general project risk and delay. To loosely group them into common categories, the biggest issues that we see can be grouped into incomplete, unclear, and unverifiable requirements. So requirements are often missing key information to properly relay the action that needs to be taken and the importance of that action. We often see inconsistent or missing imperative statements, making it unclear whether a requirement is required or a nice to have. Additionally, omitted information or flexible terms like should, may, or capable, for example. If as a third party I've won a bid and a requirement states that I should do something, am I really going to put the extra effort in and resources into ensuring it's done? If it seems like it may not be a necessity, maybe, but maybe not. On the other hand, requirements can often be too complete. Additional information can give engineers an excuse to ignore a requirement as a nice to have, or make it too complicated to understand an action without significant clarification and rework. This leads us into the issue of being unclear, beyond including too much information, which can complicate requirements as just discussed. The nature of natural language and all of the terms that are available to a requirement creator can be a major source of risk. So the use of ambiguous language, referring to the same object using multiple terms, and just overall incorrect use of language is something that almost every organization struggles with. These problems can be compounded with the multinational nature of project teams and the number of individuals of different professional backgrounds that need to interact with requirements over the course of a project. The third major issue that often isn't identified until well into the project is that a requirement is unverifiable. With the strict regulations that safety critical projects and products have to be developed under, verification is an important and often required step in development. Incomplete and unclear requirements typically aren't verifiable. For example, how do you confirm that implementation has met a requirement that requested capability, or that something needs to happen immediately? Although terms like these are ambiguous in nature, they often make it through to product implementation and are only identified as problematic when it comes to the verification stage. The nature of loosely defined standards and processes and subjectivity in manual review often make these issues difficult to identify. In a moment, Danielle will highlight how ears combined with QVscribe can help ensure these issues are highlighted and alleviated efficiently and early. But first, let's talk a little bit about ears. So to reiterate the 5 main patterns that we introduced in our last webinar, ubiquitous requirements are called that because they are always active. They are not invoked by an event or an input, nor are they limited to a subset of the system's operating states. A state-driven requirement is active throughout the time a defined state remains true. Event-driven requirements require a response only when an event is detected at the system boundary. Requirements that apply only when an optional feature is present as a part of a system are indicated by the keyword where. Optional feature requirements, we'll show the syntax in a moment. And unwanted behavior is a general term used to cover all situations that are undesirable. So this is how they look in practice. So using these patterns allows you to create consistency within your formatting, and these are how the 5 base patterns look. As you can see, the system response always comes at the end, and any preconditions always come at the beginning. That is the defining feature of ears. Today, we're going to be talking about the complex patterns. And what they do is they combine 2 or more of the base patterns when a requirement warrants it. Without format compliance, these types of complex requirements often become complicated to create and confusing or impossible to action, becoming overly wordy and unclear as to what is being asked of this requirement. This can lead to many of the issues that we just discussed. What makes these ears templates easy to understand and use is that it puts all elements in the most logical order, which can help avoid wordiness and possible omissions. Having a standardized flow and process for how requirements are authored makes it effortless for authors to remember and master the templates. In a moment, Danielle is going to show you how to leverage our software, QVscribe, to create and confirm requirement compliance to the ears patterns, and how additional features can help to alleviate some of the major requirement issues that we previously discussed. So let me first introduce QVscribe. So QVscribe is our software for empowering engineers of all experience levels to self-identify, self-correct, and create high-quality requirements. There are 3 base analyses within QVscribe that help to alleviate the biggest issues that we see within requirements. These analyses are quality analysis, which is looking for unclear, ambiguous requirements that are at risk of being misunderstood by a reader. Requirements that are too vague to be proven. They're unverifiable, they're not testable. Our consistency analysis looks at all of the terms and units that have been used throughout the document and looks for inconsistency amongst them. Multiple names referring to the same object, or again, multiple systems of units used throughout the document. Our similarity analysis compares requirement to requirement, and the purpose of this is looking for duplication or contradiction within requirements. So can these requirements exist within the same document? Am I repeating the same information multiple times? And again, do they both need to be within there? Additionally, there are templates and conformance checks for ears. So you can be confident you're creating ears compliant requirements. QVscribe integrates into Word, Excel, and other leading requirement management tools. For today, Danielle is going to show you how QVscribe can help you to write ears requirements within IBM's Doors Next Generation, and how QVscribe's quality analysis feature helps to ensure requirements will be complete, clear, and verifiable. With that, I'll pass it over to Danielle.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. Let me just get my QVscribe. And as Justin mentioned, I'm going to be walking through Doors. So this is our integration within Doors Next Gen. So to access QVscribe, I'm already logged in. There's kind of a few different ways that you can use our tool to kind of check. What I'm going to go through today specifically is kind of our quality analysis. I'm also going to walk through kind of our ears templates and conformance side as well. So within QVscribe, you can kind of look at the overall summary. So this is kind of my example document. So I only have 4 and I would say 2 requirements. So I can really get kind of an overall view of QVscribe. What I want to kind of walk through is how I can kind of fix or resolve some of these high risk requirements using Doors. Can everyone, I have my screen up here correct, right? I'll take Perfect. Thank you. So just making sure I'm walking through everything. So I'm going to start with this particular requirement. So what I really want to do is I really want to fix these problems using QVscribe and the ears conformance check. So I'm going to go into kind of the edit mode here within doors. And you can see right off the bat that lock has come off and I have the QVscribe button here. So you can't edit directly indoors, but what's great about kind of QVscribe is I can actually edit directly within the tool. So any changes that I'm making right here will automatically, so once I stop kind of typing within 2 seconds, essentially the tool will update and give me a new score, adjust to any changes. So the examples I'm using today are from like a cruise control type system. So this is an example of kind of a requirement that we would say is pretty high risk and has some critical problems. There's quite a few changes that we need to make it well written. What I first want to demonstrate is there is an ears conformance check. So from this kind of ears check, we see that it does look as though we're trying to write a requirement in an unwanted behavior template. I would agree that this does seem to kind of be describing an undesired event. So the system, something is failing within the system. How are we going to kind of adjust to that? So what we can do is kind of fix this requirement just using the structure we already have because it is following. If you feel more comfortable kind of rewriting, you can also use our ears templates, which are just right here. So I can essentially, I could start over and use an unwanted behavior template to rewrite. But I think I'm comfortable kind of just walking through the tool here because I already have that set up. So first, let's kind of walk through the problems within QVscribe because I think we have the structure for the ears template pretty down. So we have 3 quality score problems and a quality warning. So the quality warning issues are actually not going to affect the score. So the first one we have here is a universal quantifier. So what we recommend in this case is, this is creating a level of ambiguity. So to reduce ambiguity, you need to be kind of clear of the scope of the requirement. Consider replacing universal quantifiers such as all, any, or no with specific entities or values that are being referenced. Now, the reason this is a quality warning is because there are certain situations or certain contexts where a universal quantifier might be the entirely accurate language to use. A good example I like to say is something that doesn't have a limit. So if we're saying something has no signal, there's really no other way to write that. So that would be an example where I would say quality warning would be okay. And this is why we don't really flag it. We're not going to affect the scores by flagging this. We're just drawing your attention. This is a warning. This is a potential problem. Now this one, we're saying if any component of the system fails, I would say that this any is actually working alongside the kind of being pretty vague about what types of components, also working alongside the quality issue, the etc., the optional open-ended clause. So to resolve this, we want to enhance requirement completeness by removing the open-ended clause, such as including, etc., and using one or more requirements to clearly define the scope. I think this is a really good description of what the problem is here. So from my perspective, I would say that really this should probably be multiple requirements. We're talking about different components. We're also not being specific. Is there 2 components? Is there 3? Is there 10? Is there 100? We're really leaving it up to the reader to decide. And this can have some, big impacts on the actual project. So if I were to kind of rewrite this requirement, what I would suggest doing is actually writing a requirement for each component. So I'm going to just write one, and then I would suggest if this was someone's document, okay, now write a requirement similarly for each other component. So if the controller fails, so I've kind of specified what component. Now you can see because I've adjusted, those warnings are kind of disappearing. There's no longer a problem there. The next issue is we don't have an imperative. So from what I'm kind of discerning from this, it looks like, this, maybe we're using disengage as what we think is kind of telling the reader what needs to happen. But based on kind of requirement best practices and fundamentals, we do need to have an imperative. So to enhance requirement completeness, include acceptable imperatives such as shall, must, will. This ensures that the entity responsible in the action is required. We're being very clear. So we're going to say the system shall, and we can also be a little bit more specific here with the system name. That's something I would suggest as well, is being very clear about your terms. But in this case, I will leave it for kind of the expert to kind of name that. So the last issue we have is immediately. I do see some questions coming up, and I can't tell if there's something we do want to highlight here. I will finish this, and then maybe if Justin, you think there's something we should go over, I'll let you prompt me. I just see the questions coming in, and I don't want to lose the flow of where we're going, but I see them coming in pretty quickly. So immediately here, this is a non-specific temporal word. What we should do to kind of resolve this is you want to improve requirement verifiability by using time-specific constraints to indicate when the action needs to be taken. What is immediately in this case? This is very hard for me to really discern based upon, a cruise control system. Is it a second? Is it less than that? We do need to be specific. So we would suggest changing this to a more specific timing. So I'm going to say that the system shall disengage in 0.2 seconds. And as we can see, I've kind of resolved these problems, and now I still am an unwanted behavior template, and it actually is compliant. So we are following this structure. So now I'm going to move on to the next requirement. So this one, again, is pretty high risk. So I do want to edit it. I would argue that this is actually not quite written like a requirement. Usually the requirement wants to be from the kind of perspective or the point of view of the system. So what is the system going to do? We're almost discussing the result here. So essentially we're saying that the driver is going to have this, but what does the system do to give the driver the ability to override it? I would also say that this particular situation is probably going to have to be written in kind of multiple requirements. I assume that there's going to be a lot of different situations where we want to provide the driver the ability to maybe disable the system, maybe during an unwanted event. But also, I would say from this perspective, I would probably want to maybe consider it, when is the driver able to kind of turn the system off? And we can see our tool has found it kind of is non-compliant with a ubiquitous template. Again, because the structure of this requirement isn't quite written like a requirement, you do want to look at the ERS compliance, and we can help kind of maybe direct you where it's going. I would say for this one, because it's not quite clear, I would prefer using a different template. I want to write it from the perspective of when are we going to give the driver kind of the ability to override, disable the kind of cruise control. So I'm going to actually use an event-driven template to rewrite it. And I'm going to work through the problems as well while we're doing this, so you can really understand kind of where this requirement has gone wrong. So the first thing is no imperative. This is a big no-no when it comes to requirements. You need to be clear that something is actually, that something is, we're being clear that something needs to be done. So we need to have a shall or a will in here. The other thing, again, I think, falling into the same vein of not having the imperative here and not writing it from the perspective of the system, we have a superfluous infinitive, so the word able. So we want to improve requirement verifiability by removing unnecessary verb phrases. So how do you test whether the driver's able to? It's very hard to kind of test that. So we want to be sure that we're being clear kind of under what circumstances this needs to happen, which we will be using the event-driven. And the last is, again, a universal quantifier. Do we really want to give the driver the ability to override the system at all times? That's very difficult to test. So I think we need to be more specific with our requirements. So I'm going to kind of rewrite it from a situation that I know how kind of cruise control systems work. So usually when this is the trigger, when the driver sets the cruise control toggle to off. So we're turning off cruise control. This is how I would normally do it. Then the system, again, we can give a more specific system name, which I would suggest, let's say the cruise control system imperative. We can say shall, will. We do usually see shall pretty often. So that is what I'm going to use as the imperative. And then what is the system response? So we can say that when they turn it off, the cruise control system will be disabled. We recommend the use of modes. This makes it a lot easier if you have to be kind of more specific and you have to detail a lot of different requirements. If you have a clear mode outlined in your document, you can just refer to that mode and not have to go into kind of a really long detailed requirement. So we could say shall be disabled, or we could say shall enter disabled mode. Oh. And I've capitalized those because if there is a particular mode or a term, it's always good to have that capitalized. And then I'm going to kind of remove this requirement and move this one up. I find it much easier to work alongside just so you can kind of work through the problems. And then here you can see we are EARS compliant. So the last thing I wanted to do was go through some.
Sorry, Danielle. I think we do have a few questions kind of piling up here. So maybe if we can just take a second here to answer a couple of those before you dive into your next examples. Thank you very much for those couple, and thanks everyone for the questions thus far. So to go over the first question here, the question says, for event-driven requirements, does the trigger always have to be at the system boundary? Or can it be an internal event or trigger? And then in brackets, or if it's an internal event or trigger, does that make it a state-driven requirement? And I believe, Preet, you have, you want to touch on this, eh?
Hey, yeah, Justin, I can touch on this. So on this one, I think my main take would be that the main difference between a state-driven requirement and an event-driven requirement is that state-driven requirement response holds true as long as that state mentioned is active. But on the other side, the event-driven response is basically only true, like occurs when the event gets triggered in particular. So that would be the main difference. Both these things can be triggered from system boundary events, internal events, or something like that. It's mainly just like, when do you want it to be true? When a brake pedal is pressed, or for as long as the brake pedal is pressed in the car. Hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Preet. And we can follow up afterwards as well if you'd like to have a longer conversation, but just in the interest of time, we'll do some quick answers here, and then we'll move forward with Danielle's next example. So the second question here, and these other ones kind of actually work well off of each other. So if there are hundreds of components, would you still write a separate requirement for each one? So this is clearly this question is based on the guidance given within the software for that first example that Danielle ran over. So my answer for that would be, the reason that we use quality warnings, as Danielle explained, and don't identify those particular issues, the universal quantifiers, as quality score issues, is because there are times when a term like all makes a lot of sense, or any, right? If you're literally referring to every component of the system is relevant to this, then sure, a term like all can work, and that's not going to affect your score. It's going to be brought to your attention via a quality warning, but it's not going to reduce your score. That being said, what are we referring to as a component of the system? Is the radio or a component of the system? If the radio fails, then do we want the vehicle to disengage? So there's different questions that come up and that's why it's being brought to your attention, whether a term like all is the appropriate term or not. But certainly in a situation where everything is true, then that makes sense to say. To touch on the next question, at different levels, requirement ambiguity may not be equally bad. At level 1, the sorry, you know what I'm trying to say here. Specificity of a requirement will be much less than some level 6 specification requirements. Can QVscribe handle or have patterns for different levels of abstraction, etc.? So to answer your question, it's actually been something that we have been prioritizing since the new year. So we've created essentially, for this specific situation, we've created multiple starting points and multiple levels of rigor, I suppose would be a good way to put it, based on the level of requirement you're writing, whether that's a user need level requirement or, whether that's a subsystem level requirement, because as you mentioned, you do want to analyze those differently. So the way that QVscribe works, put quite simply, is we have a number of rules and we have a number of violations. And if you violate any of those rules, it's going to be highlighted as problematic. What we've done is turn more rules off and off, depending on the type of level that you're working at. And that's something that we work alongside you as well to figure out which is most appropriate to use based on the results that you're looking to get. And just to quickly touch on the last one, isn't disengage vague, needing precise definition, perhaps in a glossary? I would say that this kind of fits into a situation where potentially this would be a higher level requirement, mentioning the ability to just disengage. But when it gets broken down into a further, defined requirement, you want to be more specific on exactly how that disengagement happens. So yes, it could potentially be considered vague. It might be resolved by explaining it in a glossary, or alternatively, this could be a requirement that gets broken down further into how exactly to disengage the system. So I do see that we have some more coming in here, and we'll touch on those afterwards, but maybe we'll pass it back to Danielle. And again, if we didn't answer any of your questions here and you do want to chat a little bit more about it, more than happy to connect afterwards, but I'll pass it back to Danielle for now.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, I could feel all the questions coming in, and my phone was going off, so I was just like, I'm sure there's lots of questions coming, but I didn't really want to stop the flow of it. But we can answer more questions around this kind of near the end or as we're going through. So I do want to walk through the complex kind of templates to give a little bit more clarity. I think what I really kind of tried to demonstrate with these ones is we were just not being, there seems to be a lot of important information missing. So, when you are writing complex templates, you usually, I think complex makes it sound like it's going to be really difficult, but really it's just more detailed. And I think it also, we can demonstrate how we can be more specific when we're actually authoring requirements. So using the same kind of context with the cruise control, I'm going to write 2 new requirements using complex templates. So the first one, I'll just give a little bit of context of what I'm trying to write. So I want to specifically write a requirement when the cruise control is turned on. How does the system react when the driver presses on the brakes? So I think that's one thing that we're not being super clear in with the original requirements is like, is the cruise control engaged? How is the system going to react when it's actually specifically on? So I think sometimes when you're actually using it, you'll notice you have it maybe on and turned off. So we need to be very specific about these situations. So this case, I would be talking about a specific state while the cruise control system is on. And also I'd be talking about an event. So when the driver presses on the brakes. So it's going to be state and event driven. And you can see all of the complex templates are just right here within our tool. So there are quite a few options. What it really is kind of multiple templates grouped together. If we're talking about like an optional feature, often we need to consider how that optional feature will react when, there's to a specific event or trigger. So for this one, as I mentioned, we're doing state driven and event driven. So I'm going to start and say, well, we want to be clear that the cruise control is on. So we can say the cruise control is engaged when we're going to say the driver presses the brake pedal. Then the system, again, we can give the system a more specific name, but I'm just for ease here, I'm going to say the system, and we can use will or shall for our imperative. So I'll just use will here as an example. And we're going to essentially enter, it's going to kind of stop the cruise control from being engaged and enter kind of like a standby mode. So we can say enter standby, or I would prefer enter standby mode. And then we can clearly define that mode within our document. So here is my new requirement. Once I have, you can see I actually have it ears compliant. It does fit into the template I used. And I do actually have a warning. So this is another kind of quality issue that's coming up that is not affecting the score. It is passive voice. In this particular situation, this is actually an acceptable use of passive voice. So you'll notice that the requirement is actually active. We're saying, so what needs to be done? The system will enter standby mode so really the passive voice is really describing the precondition here. So it's often not completely necessary to ensure that this is an active voice, because really do we need to describe how you're going to engage the cruise control system in this case? No, what we need to describe is how the system will react. So passive voice is one of those things where it can be a problem if you're not being clear what entity is actually completing the requirement, but here we are very clear. So that is an example. I'll do one more example quickly. Or actually, I think we are getting a little bit close on time, so I will stop with just that one example. I do have some others that I'm happy to kind of share with anyone who's interested. But to save on time, because we do really want to get to Preet's customer success stories, I will pass it over to Preet now. So thank you everyone for kind of walking through these with me.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. Great, sweet. Just the next slide, Justin. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am going to be discussing some of the learnings from our own customer's journey with you and mention like what we have seen has worked well for them as part of the success story here. In this scenario, I'm particularly going to talk about a customer of ours who's a requirement manager and was working with a team of 15 requirement engineers. They wanted to find an efficient way to improve the requirement quality of the documents that were being generated by the team. At the time, they were struggling with multiple issues, but I'm only going to highlight the two main issues that we decided to focus on because we thought that we could get the most amount of essentially return from that. So the first issue was that the requirement writers were feeling that the requirements were just getting stuck in the requirement review process, as the requirement reviews were taking anywhere from a couple of weeks to months for completion. The second issue was that the requirement writers across the team also required very tailored feedback because of varied writing styles and the different level of requirement writing experience they had throughout the team members. This required significant time investment from some of the most experienced members of the team on a recurring basis. And what this ended up doing at the end was like they felt like they were becoming bottlenecks throughout like different projects where the requirements were being written for. We worked with the team to understand the problems at hand and construct the next steps that can be followed to remediate these issues. The main thing that we decided was to focus on was the optimization of the requirement review process. Requirement review process optimization was selected in particular because that's a gateway point. It can drive change if done right significantly and have impacts that will be felt by both authors and reviewers at the same time. As part of this initiative, the requirement manager ended up launching a new process. Basically, any requirement documents being submitted for review from there on needed to meet the minimum requirement quality threshold set by the team manager. So to put it in words of execution, in this particular case, the team was asked for years compliance of every document to be submitted for the review to be at least 50%. and minimum QVscribe score of any document being submitted for review, again, to be 3 out of 5. They basically checked how far they were with years compliance and scores, like mentioning the requirement quality, and based on that, they set these benchmarks that they would like their team to aim for and achieve before submitting for review. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. After using the new process for 3 months, the team noticed remarkable increase in requirement quality of the documents getting submitted for reviews and significant reduction in review times. This process was rolled out in multiple other teams in the company as well as a result of, success of this project. Once this process was adopted by the team, here's some of the feedback we heard from the requirement authors on the new process that I would like to share with you. So one of the key things they mentioned was that the ears provided an established expectation of what information is expected in which scenario from them. Aiming for QVscribe requirement quality score of 3 out of 5 also helped them eliminate many requirement quality issues, which could have led to ambiguity, incompleteness, non-verifiability, or non-singularity. QVscribe quality analysis in combination with ears gave authors a quality threshold to aim for and helped provide real-time feedback on what they could improve on right away. This was a huge improvement in their workflow compared to the previous process where they needed to wait anywhere from multiple weeks to months to receive feedback on their requirements, which basically depended on their stakeholder calendar availability. We also reached out to reviewers on their thoughts on the new process. Reviewers shared that they felt that their requirement review experience with the new process felt more meaningful as they now spent most of the review time discussing subject matter expertise related topics and system design intent. This was a stark contrast to their previous reviews where they spend most of their review time going back and forth on scenario, discussing if the expected information that should be there or should not be there, and resolving the issues that could have arisen from low requirement quality, issues like ambiguity and so on. Next slide. Thanks. Throughout this webinar, we've basically discussed the common problems that arise during requirement writing. We've also discussed some industry practices that can be helpful in aligning your team and giving you an edge in helping you focus on the requirement writing and team alignment. Now, before we leave, I would like to leave you with some key takeaways to consider when trying to help elevate requirement quality in your team with ears and requirement quality analysis combination in particular. The first thing that I feel like is key is like adopting ears as a team. Ears-based requirement writing is a team-based activity executed on every author's level. This activity needs to be practiced by all the team members to help with alignment and to produce consistently written requirement documents from start to finish. If everyone understands what a state-driven requirement is, for example, and all the requirement authors in the project start following the same template for state-driven requirements, then by default, all state-driven requirements in the document will convey all the same necessary pieces of information consistently. This is also further very helpful for the dev and test team, as once they know they're reading a state-driven requirement, they already have a base test case they can fork off of for that particular scenario. When the business stakeholders and the contractors, again, know the requirement in front of them is of the scenario, which is state-driven, for example, they can give feedback right away if that is the right scenario to consider, or if any component got miscommunicated or misconstrued in the information sharing process with the team. The second thing that I would mention that's important is setting a realistic minimum ears compliance threshold. EARS compliance is very similar to unit tests in a way. It's extremely hard to get 100% in EARS compliance coverage, and there comes a point in the project where the value of increasing their coverage just starts providing diminishing returns when compared to the significant effort that would be required to essentially achieve it. As a starting point, we usually suggest to our customers to run QVscribe on their documents in order to understand what percentage of their requirements are actually currently EARS compliant. Once you have a baseline, you can start setting goals as a team to increase EARS compliance by 25% this year and so on. We essentially, the hardest part is getting started. Once the teams are onboarded and start using the syntax, it starts getting easier and easier to have most of the feasible requirements to start becoming EARS compliant. The third thing is gating requirement reviews with the requirement quality tracker, in our experience, has proven like extremely helpful. Essentially, requirement reviews without any sort of automated requirement quality baseline tool have proven to be very time and resource intensive process with extremely varied results between author writing style, teams, and projects. This variance in results ends up becoming a concern at the requirement writing level in some cases, where the same work needs to be done again and again, or it's felt by the downstream stakeholders consuming requirements who have to now spend more time iterating on the design and requirements at a significant expense to the project costs. We have found introduction of requirement quality benchmark tools like QVscribe in this particular case can be immensely helpful in this scenario, with bringing consistency across the teams and projects, and also elevating requirement quality overall. Most of our customers mandate all requirement documents to be submitted for review to be EARS compliant by X percentage and to have a QVscribe score of, like 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. It really depends on the baseline they started with and the goals they have. This has helped reduce the requirement review times considerably, given back time to their most experienced project leaders, and also helped authors get more frequent feedback on what they can improve on rather than having to wait for review meetings for weeks. That pretty much concludes the main takeaways I wanted to share. I hope this ends up being helpful in your requirement writing journey. I will pass it to Justin to discuss the next follow-ups.
Thanks, Preet. Yeah, so we'll get to some questions in just a moment here. So just to talk about, what's next as far as our relationship together, hopefully. So you can feel free to contact us and we can do a one-on-one follow-up. We can do an analysis like you saw Danielle perform today on some of your requirements. The way that our software works is everything stays on your device. You're not actually sending us any of your requirements. So there's no sort of security issues or anything with that. And there's no obligations afterwards. If you decide you don't want to continue the conversation afterwards, no problem at all. But we'd be happy to give you a quick snapshot of where some issues may lie within your requirements and where work might need to be done. And if you're interested in, again, becoming EARS compliant as an organization, we can show you how much work there might be to have. Of course, we had a couple of questions in here related to the integrations that we offer. So Danielle showed that we work with Doors Next. As we mentioned, we work with other requirement management softwares, and then basically everything else we can interface with via Excel or Word. So yeah, please feel free to follow up with us. We'll send a follow-up email with some more information, again, to connect with us on LinkedIn or for any questions, or again, for one-on-one conversation around your unique situation. So we'll go to questions now. I see one just popped up. Actually, first I'll mention, so we do have our part 3 in our EARS series. So if you are interested in, again, attending the next one in our conversation, it's probably going to be towards the end of September. So we recommend that if you're looking to remain in this conversation around the benefits of format compliance within requirement engineering, make sure you're subscribed to our marketing emails and keep an eye on our virtual events page at qracorp.com. And again, connect with us on LinkedIn and we'll be able to share that information with you as well. So let's get to questions. I do see one just came in. What are the key things that have made your customers happy that they purchased QVscribe from you? Yeah, I don't know if somebody else wants to jump in on this. I would say that Preet's example is a relatively common one that we see. The improvements of requirement quality and the process efficiency improvements that come along with it. As Preet mentioned in her customer success story example, we do see a lot of times where your highest paid, most experienced engineers are really spending a lot of time on monotonous review work, right? They're finding issues. These issues are not able to be resolved by all of the requirements within an organization because they just don't have the subject matter expertise to do so. So those review times can often be quite lengthy and not exactly what your most experienced engineers exactly want to be doing with their time. So QVscribe really empowers engineers of all experience levels to be able to do at least a portion of the review process on their own. What that allows you to do as an organization, as a team, is to spend the review time, instead of talking about the structure or the language within there, to actually talk about the content that's in there, the subject matter. Are we saying what needs to be said to get done? Not what does this mean? The subjectivity conversation of what exactly do you mean by this? Once you implement a certain set of rules that can then again be forced by QVscribe, as I'm creating my requirements, I'm being highlighted the particular issues that I've brought to the forefront, and I can alleviate those issues before it comes to the review stage, and again, create more efficiency throughout that, and then throughout the remainder of the project cycle.
Justin, do you mind if I just pop in? I just wanted to mention one key thing that I've noticed too for a lot of our our customers is a lot of customers who have really built QVscribe into their process and even EARS templates. What I tend to notice is just a level of consistency across like everyone. So I conduct a lot of training sessions, which getting up and running in QVscribe and EARS is pretty easy to do. So having these training sessions with new employees or people that are coming in, I do this with a lot of our customers, and that level of extra effort that people have to make to teach new people or to teach different teams how to write clear and concise requirements is really cut down when they have QVscribe and use maybe even EARS templates as part of the process. So I would say that's one of the big kind of key things that we've noticed customers really like, is just the easy to use, easy to learn aspect of it, and then having consistent and clear requirements across their projects.
I really like that. I just wanted to add one more thing on top of this, like another perspective. Like I've been recently working with quite a bit of requirement managers who feel like, like they have just gotten so much of their time back, because now we took like a very subjective process and automated a lot of different parts of it. So now like a lot of them just have like these dashboards where they can go in and see like, okay, so what are the scores for my requirement documents, and basically form their triaging and plan of attack from there on to see, oh, okay, maybe let's work on this area to, bring up the quality here, or let's work on this area. Before, it was extremely subjective. They were reviewing thousands of requirements, or they were reviewing one out of, hundreds of requirements as a case study, and hoping that they could just like, extend that particular analysis to the entire document. So yeah, just in addition to what you guys said.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions coming in right now. If anybody does have any others, please feel free to reach out. We've got 5 minutes left here. Otherwise, if there are larger conversations again that you'd like to have that you think would be better suited for a larger one-on-one conversation, your specific unique situation, we are absolutely more than happy to continue that conversation afterwards. But if we don't have anything else for today, then thank you all very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again for webinar 3, and we will be following up again with a recording of this. And please feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn and follow up with us if you do want to have a one-on-one conversation.